Now, the wreck of one of the most famous ships to take part in a polar expedition has been filmed underwater for the first time. The Terra Nova carried Captain Scott and his team on their ill-fated expedition of Antarctica in 1912. The ship carried on in service for many years later, but was eventually sunk during the Second World War. Rebecca Morell has more.
An expedition to the South Pole captured on camera more than a century ago, but one that ended in tragedy, with the death of Captain Scott and his 4 men. It was the Terra Nova that brought them to Antarctica, a ship now forever entwined in their polar story.
Incredible. That's incredible! Oh my God, I've got shivers.
Now it's been revealed beneath the waves. The 57-metre long wooden ship filmed in detail for the first time. Lying off the coast of Greenland, its final resting place after a lifetime of service. It sank in 1943 while carrying supplies during the Second World War, but the Terra Nova will always be linked with Captain Scott.
To be able to see these significant parts of the wreck, it was truly awe-inspiring. At the aft section on the stern is the big wheel. When you think of the people who have stood there and, maneuvered the Terra Nova through ice and various things like Captain Scott, and it was sat there perfectly intact amongst the debris of the aft section of the wreck, and it was like, wow, if that ship's wheel could talk, it could tell an amazing history.
Captain Scott and his men were attempting to make history, to be the first to reach the South Pole. The footage from the expedition has been restored by the BFI's National Archive. But after trekking hundreds of miles, they discovered they'd been beaten by a Norwegian team led by Roald Amundsen. Items from the expedition are on display at the Scots Polar Research Institute in Cambridge.
So this black flag is a Norwegian flag. This would have really stuck out against the whiteness of Antarctica. And you can only imagine their hearts sinking. But they didn't take it down out of spite or anything like that. It was to corroborate the other men's expedition that they'd reached the South Pole before them, just 4 weeks before.
The deflated British party began their arduous return, but they encountered unusually bad weather and all 5 men perished. One of them, Captain Lawrence Oates, walked out of the tent and said, "I'm just going outside and maybe some time." He was never seen again.
This is the famous Captain Oates' sleeping bag. He famously sacrificed himself in the hope of saving the other men. It's cut open because he had frostbite in one of his legs. He was really in a bad way.
Amongst Captain Scott's possessions was this extremely poignant letter. It was written to the mother of Henry Bowers, one of the men who perished, and it says, "I write when we are very near the end of our journey, and I'm finishing it in company with 2 gallant, noble gentlemen. One of these is your son." The Terra Nova returned to Antarctica, knowing nothing about what had happened. The moment was marked in the ship's logbook.
They were expecting to pick up Captain Scott and his pole party, but they found out when they arrived the sad news, and they've recorded it here, stating that Captain Scott and the pole party reached the South Pole on January the 18th, 1912, and were all lost on the return journey, dying from exposure and want.
The ship then sailed on to New Zealand, where the tragic end of the expedition was announced to the world. The Terra Nova was a witness to history, but after so many years underwater, it's deteriorating. Sea life is taking over, transforming the wreck into a reef, as the ship slowly returns to the ocean. But the Terra Nova's polar legacy will live on as future generations learn of the heroism of Scott and his men. Rebecca Morell, BBC News.